Okay, party people, good morning, afternoon, evening, middle of the night, whatever this is. We are on to our next fun project, which is the second baking method. We covered the straight mix. This is the second method called the creaming method. It's super, super common, and it has one kind of hallmark part to the method that I'm hoping that you will learn from this video. So, in the creaming method, this is used for many kinds of cookies, muffins, cakes, anything like that. You are kind of adding the little scientific bonus of taking your fat, your butter, aerating it, whipping it to aerate it, and then whipping it with sugar. And what that does, it's called creaming, and what that does is all the little shards of the sugar particles cut into that butter and create these kind of air pockets, so that when your butter and sugar melt as liquefiers, those air pockets are filled up by that steam. So it's kind of an extra added way to build kind of the rise and make your crumb more delicate and that kind of thing. So the creaming method, we are going to make a vanilla cake with vanilla buttercream cream cheese frosting. So our first video will be the cake method. So the first thing we're going to do is measure out our dry ingredients, and you do this as a kind of the first step to prep it, so that when you start doing your aeration, everything can kind of follow smoothly from that. I have, of course, already started my oven. I have, of course, already prepped my pans. I have my little greased and floured pans here. So the first thing I'm going to do is do my dry ingredients. So a thing about measuring that I wanted to talk about, especially measuring flour. The way to properly measure flour or any dry ingredient is to give it a good generous scoop so that's over the top. And instead of shaking it or tapping it or anything to level it out, you scoop it and then you take either your finger or the end of a knife and kind of level out that scoop. And what that does is it gives you the right measure without compacting the flour. If you compact the flour and take the air out of it, then you might get more flour by weight than you actually need. So here's 1 cup. Do that again. I'm just gonna take a nice light scoop that kind of goes over the top. I'm gonna use my knife to kind of just scrape that off and even it off. There you go. So I have my 2 cups of flour. For this recipe, I also need a full tablespoon of baking powder. Baking powder containers often have this little leveler built in. So same thing, you take a big heaping scoop and then you can level it right off on the container like that. And then I'm also going to need a half a teaspoon of salt. Half a teaspoon of salt. Put that in. And then I'm going to kind of mix that together a little bit. Like we said before, if the recipe doesn't say to sift, you don't need to sift, but I'm gonna kind of whisk this to mix it and get some lumps out. So now I'm ready for the creaming part. So in the bowl of my mixer, I have 1 stick of softened butter. This recipe actually says room temperature, so this butter has been out for several hours. I'm gonna stick that in there. And what I'm gonna do first is turn the mixer on, and the butter is just gonna whip around by itself and start to kind of change texture a little bit and break down. And then I'm going to slowly pour 1.5 cups of sugar into the mixture, slowly so that it really gets incorporated. And then we'll turn up the speed a little bit in the mixer. And what you're looking for is a nice, fluffy, light yellow texture, light yellow, almost white. And that's how you know you've done it perfectly. So we're gonna put this guy on. I'll try not to scream over this. Always start on the lowest setting in the mixer to start out. And once it gets mixed up a little bit, is when I'm gonna add my sugar. So it takes 1.5 cups. So I'm just gonna kind of pour this in slowly. So it gives it a chance to work in. It doesn't have to be super slowly, just so that you're not like bumping it all in. Put my other half a cup. And I will kind of give you a heads up on what this looks like. So the stage it's in now, it's getting a really light, kind of fluffy, kind of wet sand looking texture. It's not yellow like butter anymore, and it kind of turns it white and kind of like a, what's that, atomic sand or whatever it's called, that toy that kids have. So I'm gonna scrape the side of my bowl to kind of make sure I get all the butter off the bottom. I'm gonna turn this back on high, whip it on high for a minute so you can see the final, what it should look like, what the texture should look like. And it should be real fluffy, like really kind of moist, wet sand. So you can see it's got a really fluffy texture. It's really light in color, and that's what you're looking for. Just this kind of fluffed up white mixture. So that is properly creamed butter. Now in our recipe, it's gonna have us add our eggs one by one, and we're going to let it beat for a couple minutes so that each egg really gets incorporated in there before we move to the next one, and that just really helps with the ingredients coming together. In the creaming method, the butter and the eggs and dairy that you use should all be room temperature. If they're too cold or they're too hot, you won't get maximum aeration. So it says on this recipe, and you should follow the rule of room temperature when creaming. Okay, so I'm gonna start on low. I'm gonna put in one of those eggs, let it get nice and mixed in. Put in another one. You see a really nice kind of batter starts to form. Look how pretty it is. Okay, last egg. So we have this delicious looking fluffy yellow batter. I want to scrape down the sides of my mixer. You can do this with a hand mixer also. Just make sure, same thing, you scrape down your sides and kind of give the bottom a little rub just to make sure that nothing is stuck on the bottom that's not getting incorporated in there. And you'll do this at a couple different stages in the mixing. Okay, so now once we have our eggs in, we are gonna put the mixer on low, and we're gonna put the flour in very gradually. So I'm just gonna do this by tipping the bowl and kind of tapping it in a little bit at a time. We don't wanna put the mixture on high because number one, we don't want flour everywhere. Number two, we don't want to over mix the flour because that develops a little more gluten, so it makes it a little tougher. So we're just going to slowly let this guy incorporate. And then once it's almost all the way incorporated, we are going to add a cup of milk with the vanilla mixed in, and we're just going to drizzle this alongside. And the batter's gonna kind of turn a little bit wetter again and kind of smooth out. You guys, it smells so delicious. I know. Guys, I'm used to saying guys. Ladies and gentlemen, it smells amazing. So we're gonna mix that together. Give it a minute and see how it's forming a really nice batter there. I am going to stop this guy one more time, scrape down my paddle and scrape down my sides just to make sure I'm getting everything incorporated. See, I do kind of have a lump at the bottom there. You can see that. So I'm gonna scrape that off, and I'm just gonna turn it on a little bit higher, maybe the second notch, for just a minute, just to get it all together. And that's really all you need to do. You don't need to do a lot of mixing. You don't want to over mix any batter. because that kind of toughens it up. So that's really as far as you need to take it. And as you can see, it's a really nice thick texture. It looks really good. So now we're gonna put it in our pans. I'm gonna get this drippy thingamajig out of the way. Move this guy. So I have our prepared pans here. I'm gonna make sure I give this a good scrape. I'm gonna divide this evenly between the two pans. And at first you can just kind of pour it into the middle and it should distribute on its own. Make sure you use all the glorious batter you just made. With the back of our spatula, kind of spread this out so that it's even as we can get it. Same thing on this side. And then we are going to pop these into the oven. And they are going to bake at 350 for 33 to 35 minutes, and then we will bring them out and see what we have.